Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are so glad to have you with us today. For this custom-tailored exploration, we're looking at a historical event that was, well, so disastrous, so completely and utterly catastrophic that its very name actually became a permanent synonym for a catastrophic defeat in the Italian language. Our mission today is to unpack exactly how that happened.
It really is a profound piece of history.
Yeah?
We are looking at a comprehensive account of the Battle of Caporetto, also known as the 12th Battle of the Isonzo,
Right.
which took place on the Italian front of World War I, stretching from October 24th to November 19th, 1917. It's a massive collision between the Kingdom of Italy and the Central Powers, primarily Austria-Hungary, but heavily reinforced by Germany.
And the sheer jaw-dropping scale of this battle is just, it's something else. As we go through the material today, you're going to hear about a massive, devastating chemical weapons attack. We're going to witness the perfection of a terrifying new military tactic that completely changed the rules of warfare. You'll even hear about a young Erwin Rommel making his mark. And it all culminates in an astonishing 150-kilometer retreat.
I want to frame the stakes for you right from the beginning. This isn't just a story about shifting lines on a map or a dry list of dates and troop movements.
No, definitely not.
It is an absolute masterclass in how a combination of overconfidence, deep logistical failure, and sheer technological surprise can completely collapse an army of over 1 million men. It's about how rapidly things go wrong when foundational cracks are finally exposed.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to set the scene because the context leading up to this is just grueling. It's the spring and summer of 1917.
Right.
The Italian and Austro-Hungarian armies have been fighting along the Isonzo River, which is in modern-day Slovenia. And when I say fighting, I mean they have already fought 11 previous battles in this exact same sector. 11. Both sides are just entirely exhausted. They are bleeding each other dry. So if both sides are at their absolute breaking point, what did the Austro-Hungarians actually do? Did they just sit there and wait for the front to collapse?
They panicked, to put it simply.
Wow.
The Italians had actually found some success during that 11th Battle of the Isonzo. They managed to push the Austro-Hungarians back. Emperor Karl of Austria-Hungary looked at the situation, realized a final breakthrough by the Italians was imminent, and he reached out for a lifeline.
It's a fascinating, very human detail in the historical record.
Yeah.
Emperor Karl writes a letter directly to Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II. He's essentially begging for help, stating flatly that his forces are running out of men, and if the Germans don't send troops to Italy immediately, the entire front is going to shatter.
What's fascinating here is the internal friction this request caused within the German high command. You have these massive historical figures trying to decide the fate of the war.
Like who?
Well, Paul von Hindenburg and Arthur Ars von Strausenberg, they both agree that they need to pull troops from the Eastern Front and send them to the Isonzo sector to bail out their ally.
Makes sense.
But Erich Ludendorff, another monumental figure in the German command, is dead set against it. He fiercely opposes sending the troops. But ultimately, he gets overruled.
And once the Germans commit, their preparation is just chillingly methodical. In September, the Imperial General Staff sends a team of 3 experts down to the Italian front. And this team is led by a chemist, Otto Hahn.
Yes.
They are explicitly sent there to find the absolute perfect geographical site to launch a massive gas attack.
It is a cold, highly calculated approach to warfare. They specifically choose the Caporetto sector. Now, Caporetto was situated in a mountainous valley, and up until this point, it was considered a quiet sector.
Quiet meaning not much fighting.
Exactly. But it had a very specific advantage for the Germans. There was a good road that ran directly west, right through the mountain valley, and out onto the Venetian plain.
It's the perfect funnel.
It really is.
And to make sure they can exploit it, they send Lieutenant General Konrad Krapf von Bellmenzingen to scout the ground. Since he is a recognized expert in mountain warfare, they are clearly putting all their best minds on this one specific point on the map. They even form a brand new 14th Army, commanded by the German Otto von Below.
Which highlights a major strategic shift. Ludendorff's strategic advisor, Lieutenant Colonel Georg Wetzel, advised them to use these fresh German divisions to strike directly at a weak point in the Italian line. They weren't going to just spread out and fight everywhere. They were going to concentrate their power like a laser.
And as they are meticulously planning this out, the Italians make a massive, almost unbelievable blunder. They actually broadcast their local weather information openly over the radio.
Yes, they did.
Wait, so they just broadcasted it for anyone to hear? That's basically giving the Germans a daily weather forecast complete with a VIP invitation to attack. Talk about an unforced error.
It highlights the vital importance of operational security, a lesson the Italians learned in the most painful way imaginable. The Germans were waiting for the absolute perfect meteorological moment to deploy chemical weapons, and the Italians were literally handing them the atmospheric data they needed to finalize their plans.
Which brings us to the attack itself. It is October 24th, 1917. The assault had actually been delayed for 2 days because of foul weather. But now the weather has shifted. There is zero wind, and the entire front is blanketed in this thick, heavy mist.
The environmental conditions are absolutely crucial to understand here. The mist and the lack of wind created an atmospheric trap. It meant that any gas released would not blow back on the attackers.
Right.
And it wouldn't dissipate quickly. It would just settle heavily into the valleys and trenches where the Italians were huddled.
So at exactly 02:00 a.m., under the cover of this thick fog, the Germans initiate the attack. But it's not with traditional artillery. The historical accounts describe them secretly digging in almost 900 metal tubes on a reverse slope. Can you explain what that means for the listener?
Of course. A reverse slope just means the side of the hill facing away from the enemy, so the Italians couldn't see what they were doing.
Smart.
And those metal tubes were similar to Lieben's projectors. If you aren't familiar with World War I weaponry, think of a Lieben's projector as a crude but highly effective early mortar, used specifically to lob large canisters of poison gas over a hill and into enemy trenches.
And they wire all 894 of these tubes to trigger electrically at the exact same time. They fire canisters containing 600 milliliters of a lethal cocktail, a chlorine arsenic agent, and diphosgene.
Diphosgene is a respiratory irritant that basically destroys the lungs.
Right. It's horrifying.
The psychological and physical impact of this cannot be overstated. A dense cloud of poison gas literally smothered the Italian trenches. And here is the terrifying reality for the Italian defenders. Their issued gas masks were only rated to protect them for 2 hours or less.
Oh, wow.
Imagine being a soldier in that trench. You are enveloped in a toxic cloud, your mask is degrading by the minute, and you know the clock is ticking?
It's pure nightmare fuel. Knowing their masks are failing, many defenders simply flee in terror. Even so, 500 to 600 men are killed right there in the trenches before they can even escape the cloud. And then, everything goes quiet again. Just dead silence in the fog until 0600 a.m.
That silence must have been agonizing, because at 0600 a.m., the bombardment shifts from gas to high explosives, the mortars open up, targeting all the Italian wire in the trenches they plan to assault.
The escalation is rapid. At 06:41 a.m., 2,200 guns open fire. It's an unimaginable wall of sound and destruction. They specifically target the Valley Road, pounding it to dust so that the Italians can't bring up any reserves to plug the gaps.
Exactly.
Then at 0800 a.m., the ground itself literally erupts. The Germans detonate 2 massive mines that they had tunneled under the Italian strongpoints on the heights. And with that, the infantry charges. But I know they weren't just marching slowly across no man's land in a traditional trench charge. How are these stormtroopers actually pulling off this assault?
They were using what are called infiltration tactics, partly developed by Oskar von Hutier. Instead of throwing a wall of men directly at the enemy's strongest defenses, specially trained stormtroopers acted like water finding cracks in a dam.
Finding the path of least resistance.
Right. They flowed right around the strong points, bypassed the heavy resistance, and attacked the weak spots deep behind the lines.
And they were loaded with brand new mobile tech to do it, right?
Exactly. They were carrying the Model 0815 Maxim light machine gun, portable flamethrowers, light trench mortars, and even mountain guns right there with the advancing infantry. They were moving fast and hitting hard.
What about the flanks? If you push that deep into a valley, aren't you worried about getting surrounded from the mountains above?
That's where the coordination becomes truly impressive. Alpine troops were sent to infiltrate the adjoining ridges, specifically the Matadur and Kolovrat crests. And as these Alpine troops climbed, they were literally unspooling telephone wires behind them.
No way. While climbing.
While climbing. This allowed them to stay in direct contact with their artillery and call in pinpoint strikes on the fly to protect the stormtroopers in the valley. It was a level of tactical flexibility that the Italians were completely unprepared for.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because of these infiltration tactics, the breakthrough is almost instantaneous. The attackers are marching down this excellent valley road toward Italy, facing almost no opposition. They advance an incredible 25 kilometers on the very first day.
Which is staggering.
In World War I terms, advancing 25 kilometers in a single day is basically light speed.
Mm-hmm.
But advancing that fast has to be incredibly dangerous.
It is incredibly dangerous. You are effectively stretching the rubber band of your supply lines. Advancing 25 kilometers means your food, your ammunition, and your reinforcements are suddenly 25 kilometers behind you. As we'll see, that rubber band is eventually going to snap.
Right.
But in the immediate moment, von Below's central penetration was so deep and so fast that it threw the entire Italian Second Army into total disarray.
And behind the lines, the Italian command is completely collapsing. The commander of the Italian Second Army, Luigi Capello, is bedridden with a terrible fever during all of this. He realizes his forces are ill-prepared and are actively being routed. So he begs his superiors for permission to withdraw his men to the Tagliamento River to form a new defensive line.
And this introduces us to Marshal Luigi Cadorna, the Italian Supreme Commander. Cadorna is a figure of immense stubbornness. He's directing the battle from 30 kilometers behind the front lines. And when Capello begs to retreat, Cadorna flatly refuses. He denies reality, demanding his troops stand their ground against an enemy that has already bypassed them.
It takes Cadorna until October 30th, 6 days after the attack began, to finally realize the battle is lost and order a retreat to the Tagliamento River. But by then, it's too late for an orderly withdrawal. It turns into a desperate, chaotic sprint for survival.
Total chaos.
The roads become completely choked. You have retreating soldiers, terrified civilians fleeing their homes, horse-drawn artillery all jammed together trying to cross the bottleneck of the river bridges.
The delay in ordering the retreat was fatal. The German and Austro-Hungarian forces are right on their heels the entire time, ambushing them constantly. These desperate fighting retreats and ambushes became known as the Battle of Pozzuolo.
Yeah.
It allowed the Central Powers to envelop massive portions of the Italian army before they could cross to safety. The Italians eventually managed to break through the encirclement, but not before the Austro-Hungarian 55th Infantry Division established a bridgehead across the Tagliamento on November 2nd.
We have to talk about the numbers here.
Yeah.
Because providing you with the exact losses is the only way to truly grasp the scale of this disaster. The casualties are staggering. 13,000 Italians were killed, 30,000 were wounded. And then an absolutely massive 265,000 to 275,000 Italian soldiers were taken prisoner. 250,000 men captured.
The sheer logistical burden of capturing 250,000 prisoners in a matter of days is difficult to comprehend.
Beyond the prisoners, there were 300,000 stragglers who were separated from their units and 50,000 outright deserters. The Italian army lost over 3,152 artillery pieces, 3,000 machine guns, and 1,712 mortars. In the span of this single campaign, the Italian army's effective strength plummeted from 1.8 million troops down to just 1 million.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to ask why so many Italians were taken prisoner. Why did over 250,000 men simply surrender? It wasn't just the tactical surprise or the terror of the gas, it was a complete collapse of morale.
Because of Cadorna.
Exactly. The Italian Supreme Commander, Luigi Cadorna, was universally detested by his own troops. He maintained an incredibly harsh, unforgiving disciplinary regime.
Imagine being in middle management today and having a boss like Cadorna who just fires hundreds of executives on a whim. It's no wonder the frontline workers, the soldiers, completely checked out. I was looking at the records from this time, and before the battle even began, Cadorna had fired 217 generals, 255 colonels, and 355 battalion commanders.
Unbelievable.
He was firing anyone who disagreed with him or failed to achieve the impossible. His troops hated him so much that when the lines broke, they surrendered willingly, rather than fight and die for a commander who treated them so poorly.
It is a stark reminder that an organization runs on morale, just as much as an army runs on rations and ammunition. When the leadership shows zero regard for the well-being of the people on the ground, those people will abandon the leadership the moment the pressure becomes unbearable.
So the Italians are running, the Germans and Austro-Hungarians are chasing, and we finally see the pendulum swing. The Italian army eventually manages to halt their retreat and set up a new defensive line 150 kilometers away at the Piave River in Monte Grappa. This happens around November 10th. But the Central Powers didn't necessarily stop because the Italians suddenly mounted an unbreakable defense. Why did the German advance actually grind to a halt?
This is the profound logistical irony of Caporetto. Remember that rubber band we talked about earlier?
Yeah, the supply lines.
It finally snapped. The initial assault by the Central Powers was incredibly successful. They advanced over 100 kilometers toward Venice. But their supply lines were stretched to the absolute breaking point. We have to remember the geopolitical context here. The Allied naval blockade of the German Empire was already in full effect. Germany was struggling with massive food shortages and widespread malnutrition at home and in the ranks.
There's a specific brilliant detail about Erwin Rommel that highlights this perfectly. He was a junior officer here, and he actually won the Pour le Mérite for his actions during this battle. For those who might not know, the Pour le Mérite was Germany's absolute highest military honor at the time.
Sure.
But even while achieving this incredible success, in his writings, Rommel constantly bemoaned the demands placed upon his poorly fed troops. The grueling night marches, the continuous combat, and the utter lack of food took a massive toll.
It wasn't enemy fire that ultimately stripped the Germans of their momentum. It was sheer exhaustion and starvation. They had captured all this territory, pushed the Italians to the brink, but when they finally reached the Piave River, they simply didn't have the calories or the ammunition to push any further. Their own rapid success became their logistical downfall.
And the political fallout from this 150-kilometer retreat is immediate and severe. The disaster completely collapses the Italian government. Prime Minister Paolo Boselli's government falls. And Marshal Cadorna, the stubborn commander who refused to retreat and was hated by his men, is finally forced to resign by the new prime minister, Vittorio Emanuele Orlando.
A necessary change.
Cadorna is replaced by Armando Diaz and Pietro Badoglio, who immediately implement a more cautious strategy focused on rebuilding the shattered forces. But the panic wasn't just limited to Italy, was it?
Not at all. The geopolitical panic extended far beyond Italy's borders. The collapse of the Isonzo front terrified the other allies. It led to a hastily called meeting of British, French, and Italian leaders at Rapallo in early November.
They had to figure something out.
Fast. British Prime Minister David Lloyd George used the absolute panic of Caporetto to finally push through his idea for a Supreme War Council to unify Allied strategy. The Allies realized they couldn't fight separate wars anymore. They had to coordinate.
The panic was so real that 6 French and 5 British infantry divisions, along with air contingents, were rushed down to Italy to help. They deployed at the Mincio River well behind the new lines because the British and French strategists honestly believed the Italians couldn't even hold the Piave River line.
Right.
Beyond the military shifts, the cultural scar left by this battle on Italy is incredibly deep. As I mentioned at the start of our discussion, the word Caporetto gained a permanent resonance.
It stopped being just a geographical location and became a noun for a catastrophic failure.
Mussolini later used the term to describe a failed socialist general strike in 1922, calling it the Caporetto of Italian socialism. The battle also spawned massive literary works that gave people a gritty, boots-on-the-ground feel for what that horrific retreat was actually like. It's the vivid, bloody backdrop for Ernest Hemingway's famous novel A Farewell to Arms, heavily influencing the protagonist's disillusionment with the war. And on the tactive side, Erwin Rommel used his experiences here to write his highly influential military handbook, Infantry Attacks.
The legacy is truly massive.
So what does this all mean? If we pull this entire narrative together for you, we are looking at an incredible historical moment. It's a terrifying mix of technological innovation like the synchronized gas attack and tactical evolution with the stormtroopers bypassing strongholds.
Yes.
It is also the story of massive, arrogant command failure by leaders like Cadorna. And perhaps most ironically, it's the story of an army defeating itself by advancing so quickly that it simply outran its ability to defeat its own soldiers.
This raises an important question, and it's one you can apply far beyond military history. Caporetto proves that even heavily fortified positions, whether you are looking at a literal trench line, a corporate business strategy, or a seemingly unshakable market leader, can be bypassed.
That's a great point.
They aren't always defeated by overwhelming brute force. They are defeated by targeted innovation, like those infiltration tactics, and the precise exploitation of a single weak point. Furthermore, it highlights the absolute non-negotiable necessity of morale. If a team fundamentally detests its leadership, the entire structure will fold at the very first opportunity.
It is a lot to take in. But before we leave you today, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own. Imagine for a moment the psychological state of those Austro-Hungarian and German soldiers standing at the banks of the Piave River in November 1917.
Just looking across the water.
They had just pulled off what was arguably one of the greatest tactical masterstrokes in military history. They broke the unbreakable stalemate of trench warfare. They advanced 150 kilometers. They captured 250,000 enemies. By every metric of battle, they were invincible.
Yet as they stood there staring across the water, their stomachs were completely empty.
Their supply lines were shattered, their boots were falling apart, And worst of all, despite this monumental historic victory, the war still wasn't over. It forces you to wonder, at what point does a flawless victory stretch so far and demand so much that it inevitably transforms into the very seed of your ultimate defeat? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.